some 55 million military aid given by Ireland to Ukraine.
Yeah, so just in terms of our neutrality, which is something that where we need to look at all the time lately. So the Irish government has given 55 million worth of military aid to the Ukraine. This is Ireland's share of a 2.5 billion EU package, according to the Department of Defence. These funds are said to be used by agreement for exclusively non-lethal military assistance. The funding is to be used for support such as the purchase of body armour, medical supplies and rations. Originally, the EU committed to a 500 million fund, which has increased 5 times. Ireland has also committed to assisting with an EU training mission for Ukrainian troops. And then the question really remains, is this compatible with our neutrality? Like, you know, in terms of humanitarian aid, we're taking in refugees and we're supporting them. So that's humanitarian aid. Why are we giving military aid?
It is worrying. And I think what I've noticed is our emotional buttons have been pressed on a daily basis. And while those buttons have been pressed, there seems to also be a hierarchy of victimhood when it comes to what's happening in Ukraine and in Western Russia. What I mean by that is our emotional buttons have been pressed with images and footage coming out of Ukraine, which at times is questionable, and language coming. So as an example, there was an attack on infrastructure across Ukraine over the last number of days, and I am not in favor of any attacks that in any way endanger civilians in any way, or breaks down their infrastructure, their water supply, their energy supply, or anything like that. And I understand that there was 11, it's reported that 11 people have been killed. So I'm not taking away from that with what I'm about to say. But since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, since March, there has been story after story come out of Ukraine that's being debunked and that's being put upon us to press our emotional buttons so that we become militarized, so that we call for war, so that we see other groups of people in the world as less human or subhuman compared to us. And I'll give you some examples of some of those buttons that have been shown recently or around Facebook or around Twitter. There was images, and I remember some of these images myself in Western media, of people bandaged, bloodied, coming out last March, April, May, June, right up until early September. Images like this. But then video footage then emerges, usually to debunk it in one way or another. Here's some footage that came out to debunk these particular images. And she's apparently saying, let me take a photograph so I can send it to my sister in Russia. So this seems to be some kind of a photo shoot of some sort, which is the images are then used all around the world. Another example, and I can't 100% qualify these things, but my intuition and knowing how secret services operate, knowing what they did in Syria, knowing what they did in Iraq, all these things, my intuition and my awareness of the patterns of the behaviors of especially UK Secret Service do a lot of this kind of stuff. This can't be ignored. I can't fully qualify it, but it can't be ignored. And there is a reason why I'm showing you this, and I'll focus in on that in a wee moment.
So roll cameras. One take one. Here we go, and action!
Okay, so this is purported to be footage from last March of a scene set in which people are fleeing from something. It's purported that this was used in media around the Western Hemisphere. The reason I'm showing this is that there are real massacres and there is real suffering happening in Ukraine, but it's not happening in Western Ukraine, or especially it hasn't been happening until this week. It's been happening in Eastern Ukraine. Here's a map of the Donbass region, which contains Donetsk and parts of Luhansk as well, and the bombing that has happened over the last few years. And over the last few months, Donetsk city, which is a civilian populated city, doesn't, as far as I'm aware, have any particular military infrastructure in it. There's no missiles being launched from Donetsk city. It has been bombarded by Ukrainian forces, armed and facilitated by us for the last 2 months, intensely on a daily basis. There are images and video footage widely available, if you bother going looking for it, of people lying in the street dismembered, video footage of the missiles as they're going off, just horrible footage and images that doesn't have to be faked, doesn't have to be created, and isn't being shown in mainstream media in the Western Hemisphere. And that's the point I'm making with this, that there seems to be a hierarchy of victimhood. And until we all see what's happening right across the scene in a fair and balanced way, then there's going to be no end to this. And our emotional buttons are going to be pressed more and more and more. It reminds me, and I don't want to make light of it, but it reminds me of a character from the English comedian Catherine Tate. This character she had in a sketch that would get shocked and panicked and whoo, at anything and everything. And it almost seems like that's what they're trying to turn us human beings into, that they just have to show an image of anything and put any context to it and press our emotional buttons so that we will call for war, that we will call for giving more arms to exacerbate a situation that already is out of hand. I just want to finish up on this with something that's quite upsetting. And again, it's an example of something that is not so far in Western mainstream media. Last Thursday or Friday, I came across a tweet, and it was a video of human bodies, clearly dead human bodies, civilians with their hands tied behind their backs, being thrown into a pit. And the text that accompanied the tweet said that this came from a senior Azov. Azov is now the National Guard in Ukraine, but it's also, let's say, term it an ultra right-wing, ultra-nationalist military force. And it claimed that this was all came off an Azov leader's Telegram account, and that it was a warning to civilians who cooperated with Russian forces. And I clicked on the link, went into the Telegram account, and the first thing I did was I went through the previous about 50 or 60 tweets, and I took the text, which was in Ukrainian, and I put it into Google Translate to ensure that this was and is an Azov member's account. And sure enough, it appeared very much to be. Then I found the actual story with the video attached. And this is a still image. There's no way we're going to show the video, but this is a still image. And we'll pull back out of this image in a minute. But this is a still image I took from the video. And I have to say it's gruesome. And it's no way is this made up, because these bodies came straight down that embankment, and it certainly wasn't a living actor that did that. Anyway, I was pretty sure that this was from his Azov leader's account. The text, when I translated it, was a warning to civilians not to cooperate with Russians. In the last 2 days, I have seen and read a number of articles that highlighted the fact that this story has been changed, and that there's video footage going around, which I saw myself, of a red armband, which seems to have been photoshopped in some way onto one of the soldiers to infer that it was in some way a Russian soldier that was doing this, or one of the soldiers was Russian. The Photoshop didn't seem very good, because you could see that when the soldier was walking behind foliage, some of the red was actually in front of the foliage rather than scattered behind the foliage, if you know what I mean. So, but there seems to be an attempt to invert that story now. But the bottom line, there is a pit somewhere in Ukraine or Western Russia in which human beings, of dead bodies, are being thrown into the pit, and it's not being reported anywhere other than video footage coming out from people who were scandalized and who were shocked by seeing this on Azov member profiles. And it would appear that Azov have a habit of videoing themselves committing sometimes atrocious acts and putting up online. I saw the murder and torture of a room full of Russian soldiers, in which they were shot in the knees, in the groin, plastic bags were put over their heads, and they were beaten. So this is not being revealed, and yet there seems to be this hierarchy of victimhood. And I think some balance, some reality, and some truth has to be shown to everybody so that we can start really collectively calling for a genuine halt to what's going on in Eastern Europe at the moment. That was a long tirade. I apologize about that, Padraig. Do you want to come in on anything here?
Well, just footage and video that we're seeing. It is difficult, like for people to discern what they can trust, because you see you've shown something there that appears to be shocking, and then you can show another angle where it appears to be staged. Like, it's very difficult for people to know what to believe, and this feeds back into then people being afraid to nearly look at anything other than what they're shown on mainstream, which is quite difficult because that's quite biased, you know. So there's the difficulty.
Even with the mainstream, as an example, there was an image put around of Jeremy Bowen.
I've seen that,
Image in which he's lying on the ground, and it looks like he's in a war zone. He's lying, seeking shelter. But the wider image, when was released somehow, shows that there are pedestrians there with their shopping bags, and that actually he's not in a danger zone. There's no reason for him to be lying on the ground sheltering as though he's hiding from missile attacks. And so that's BBC. You know, at the beginning of this conflict, BBC showed actual footage from a Star Wars movie, a scene from Star Wars claiming it to be a Russian attack. So we have to be very careful. And I did see a video of one of Zelensky's main advisors, a young guy, saying openly that they have to tell as many lies as possible. The lies have to be as big as possible, and they just have to be persistent so that they will win the information war. So it's just important that this hierarchy of victimhood is challenged. There's people suffering throughout in this conflict, particularly over the last week in western and northern Ukraine with the attack on infrastructure and the killing of what appears to be 11 civilians. But right across the conflict and historically, there's been a lot of suffering here. The suffering has to stop. And one way to do that is to acknowledge all of the victims of this conflict in Eastern Europe and Ukraine.